so with the looming graduation and no prospects of what to do in the medium, I kind of just sat and pondered in my dorm room one day, what should I do? Where shall I go? And kind of thinking of the work I initially started college with, wanting to work international service in some sense, either international relations or for an NGO. I knew I wanted to do something internationally, probably in South Africa, because some of my great virtual mentors during my whole process of even just joining the church were the likes of Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela. So I knew South Africa was a place I wanted to go.
That's not a judgment from the Almighty. I think John's working on the volume.
Okay.
Is the mic on?
Yep.
It is on. Should I just speak louder?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And I knew I also wanted to do something that still involved my faith. So I did what any 21-year-old would do in the early 2010s. I Googled it. I Googled Anglican South African service, and the very first link that popped up was a organization through our presiding bishop's office called the Young Adult Service Corps, or YASC for short. And so I clicked the link and watched the first video that popped right up there on the home screen. And it was this video of the sun rising on the South African bush country with a small little school and a monastery. And I just had this immediate feeling, I'm going there. Don't know why, don't know how it happened, but I just got like God tingles in the back of my neck, just being like, nope, you're going here. And there's just a moment where I remember kind of just in my head saying, here I am, Lord, send me. And while there will be many a sermon for me to bring up my time in South Africa, what I will say for this is that it was probably one of the most pivotal years of my life. Living in a monastery, serving God's people in South Africa at the school that the monks built for the rural farming kids. It's where I learned to love myself, love my neighbor, and felt God's love for the first time. It's kind of the epiphany I needed to understand my calling to become a priest. And it was only through that journey that I felt like I truly could comprehend God's love. And it was a calling. I had two callings, my calling to become a priest, but also my calling to do YASC. And if you noticed, all of our readings kind of focused on calling. And one thing I want to get straight, because the church doesn't always do a good enough job sometimes, but clergy are not the only people called. We're just called to a very narrow ministry. Everyone, by virtue of their baptism, is called by God, is called to serve God. And so what does that mean? What does it mean to be called? And I think both of our readings kind of do, or our first reading from the Hebrew Testament and our Gospel do a very good job of kind of showing what that means. And so the first is about worthiness. I know many people who feel a calling from God can tend to feel like they're not worthy for such a gift or such a calling from the Almighty. I know every person who has ever been ordained has that same feeling. But I don't think that's always, I know it's not true. Everyone is worthy of God's call. Everyone is worthy of God's love. But, in our Isaiah reading, we kind of did this scene where Isaiah doesn't feel like he is. But God doesn't pay any attention to it. If you read it, Isaiah is the one who says, woe is me, for I have unclean lips and come from a people of unclean lips. And the person who actually cleansed him wasn't God. seraph came, took a coal, touched his lips, and saying his guilt has departed him, and he is now sinless. But it almost seemed like the seraph did that for Isaiah, not because he wasn't worthy. In some sense, why would God even show himself in such a great scene, in the temple, sitting on a high, lofty throne, with angels and archangels flying around him, singing, "Holy, holy, holy"? To me, I think the sheer fact that Isaiah was seeing it was a sense that God saw Isaiah worthy to be a prophet for his people Israel. And one thing that I was always taught when I was discerning my own call to the priesthood is that God is not one to call worthy people, but makes the called worthy. It's almost in the act of responding to God's call, of taking that invitation and joining God on a journey, that we become worthy ourselves. Or, even better yet, we understand why God sees us as worthy. And the next thing is, what is God doing by calling us? I mean, in our gospel reading, Jesus, being the God incarnate, being the man who with his own words, saying, "Peace, be still," can quell a storm, who was with God as the Word in the beginning of creation, he could have just commanded the fish to go into the boats, right? He didn't need to have the disciples do it. Better yet, he could have just sent them straight to the fishmonger. "Fish, go out," right? But why does he ask Peter to cast his net? And that's where I think God, by calling us, is inviting us to participate in God's miracles, to participate in God's work in the world. That it isn't so much about a one-time event, but a lifelong journey of being present to God, serving God's people, and just casting our nets, just doing a bare minimum to bring God's miraculous work in the world. And so I wonder, as we're in this Epiphany season, as we ourselves are in the season of revelation and of understanding of who God is, how is God calling us right now? How is God calling St. Stephen's and all of us individually to serve God's people, to bring his love known, to bring his miracles, to bring grace, forgiveness, and healing in this world? There's a quote by St. Augustine of Hippo: "Without God, we can't. And without us, God won't." We're called, all of us, by virtue of our baptism, to serve God's kingdom, to bring God's kingdom with God's power. And God is always calling all of us, right now, to always turn towards love, faith, and grace. So I guess, again, during this season of Epiphany, how is God